Welcome back to Streaming Media West 2022, and unfortunately I did not, as I said last time, make it out to the beach. I did, however, make it to lunch and then to a panel, and the panel that I moderated was around best practices in power consumption. And with me on that panel was Barbara Lange. So Barbara, tell me a little bit about your background, and then let's talk about power consumption.
Sure. Well, thanks for having me.
Sure.
My name is Barbara Lange, and I am the CEO of Kibo121, a consultancy to help media technology companies on their path to sustainability. Prior to that, I just started in January. Prior to that, I spent 12 years as the executive director of SMPTE. I'm sure most of your viewers will know that organization. A 100-year-old organization that does a lot of good in terms of education around motion imaging technology, and also an international standards body. So got to know the industry, and want to turn my attention now to helping it to become more green.
You mentioned the 100-year thing. It made me think my very first production company that I ever started was called Century 7, VII for Roman numeral 7, because we started it in the 100th year of film, and film has been described as the seventh art.
Right.
And so that was the name of our company.
I like that. Very clever.
So sustainability and power consumption, why should companies in the industry care about that?
It's a good question. I mean, this ICT, Internet Computing Technology sector is certainly not the biggest contributor to carbon emissions in the world after transportation and energy and electricity. But we do take part in transportation, flying around the world. We do power everything through electricity. So we are contributors, and the fact of the matter is every industry needs to care about sustainability in the long run, because we're all in this together. We have only one planet.
Sure.
So yeah, and I think the interesting thing is that it's not a new idea, but it's only now coming into the consciousness of this industry. And what we're learning is that being green is all about being efficient.
Okay.
And
right.
Everybody wants to be efficient. It's a cost savings thing.
Right. Very
So,
much so.
so I think there's a good synergy between how you can run an efficient business, be conscious of your costs, and really contributing to a greener future.
Now, one reason it's come into the consciousness is we've sort of done what we said we were going to do 20 years ago, which is revolutionize the way that people consume content. So now that we're there, some of the companies are public companies, and you mentioned in the panel that public companies are, the SEC is starting to sort of essentially legislate them into thinking about this. Can you talk a little bit about ESG, and I think you said Sector 3?
Scope 3.
Scope 3,
yeah,
okay.
Yeah, so firstly, the United States is about 5 years behind Europe. Europe has had many years already of regulatory requirements on it. And so we're learning a lot from what has gone on in Europe. And it's the investor community who are paying a lot of attention to ESG investing, and it's a bit messy because the ways in which companies self-report is not consistent, and so that all needs to be cleaned up. But one of the things that the SEC is doing to contribute to that is to help clear that up, is to require companies to have sustainability metrics as part of their financial filings.
Okay.
That is something that is due, they say, by the end of this year to take effect with the 2024 filing year. Now, whether that actually happens on that timeline, I don't know, but it will happen, if not then, shortly thereafter.
Sure.
And what that means is that public companies are going to have to understand their Scope 1, 2, and 3 measurements.
Okay.
So Scope 1 is measuring their carbon emissions of their operation.
Okay.
Scope 2 is what kind of energy are they using to do their run their business, with the goal of more renewables. And Scope 3, which is oftentimes 80% of their entire measurement, is their supply chain.
Okay.
And so even these small little companies who say, I'm not being mandated, no, you're not, but you're part of this. You're a Scope 3 to somebody else.
And if you want to contract with somebody else, you'll have to meet those.
That's right, and it's already happening in the broadcast industry where RFPs are requiring vendors to highlight, something that they're doing around sustainability. So It's early days here in the U.S. in this regard, and certainly in our industry, but I do believe it's just the beginning.
Well, and they often say the things that you want to change, you can change by starting to measure them.
Yes.
So,
yes.
so how do we measure that? And I know there were a couple things we talked about on the panel around, number of megabytes delivered per watt or something like that. But what are some other ways, say, from the production side of the house where you come out of, that would be good ways to think about measuring?
It's a very good question, and it too is a bit messy in terms of standards or best practices around how do you measure these sorts of things. If you look at, I like to look at the content or the workflow from a content creation standpoint, a content manipulation standpoint or phase, and then a content distribution phase. If we look at those three phases, generally speaking, content creation is where content is being, on-set shots,
right.
and there's a lot of work and measurements there, from using e-vehicles for your talent, from not using single-use plastics.
Sure.
There are different groups who are certifying green productions, Albert out of the UK, another group in the US, the Green Production Guide. So and also virtual production, right? Big savings in
Sure.
transportation
Right.
costs, although there is question about whether the LED panels counter that. But nevertheless, there's a lot of work going on in greening up production. I'll skip manipulation for a second, go right to distribution, where groups like Greening of Streaming are
Sure.
looking at how to measure in an accurate way, and then also be on a regular reporting mechanism. So there's some work going on in that space. The middle part, this manipulation part, where all the content is digital, it's in the cloud, it's being touched by a million different, organizations. Who owns the content, who's responsible for the energy, is very messy.
Okay.
And that is a space where it needs, that part of the industry needs to come together and kind of sort that through and figure out what's the best way, so that you can be assured your production from the very beginning to the very end has a proper carbon emission measurement.
Okay.
And that's still a little bit down the road.
Yeah, it sounds just complex, even contemplating it at this point. Well, I'm glad you're on the task with your new company of actually sort of starting to help companies look at that. And I very much appreciate your time.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, Tim. Appreciate it.
And we will be back with our next guest in just a few minutes.